Hello everyone, welcome back to another SUPboarder video. This video we're going to be speaking all about this rather sexy KT range of foil boards and really driving into the Downwind SUP foil boards. The range has got bigger overall this year, and especially for the Downwind boards, a lot of you asking, why do we need so many Downwind SUP shapes? Well, actually now there is quite a few different abilities, different rider conditions, different things that are coming out in this SUP Downwind discipline that are showing us we need different shapes. And this video is hopefully going to help you understand which of these shapes is right for you. Yes, I will be covering some of the wing and the prone foiling boards as well, but unfortunately I won't be driving into those as much as I will be doing the SUP Downwind shapes. In this video I'm going to go over what the design characteristics are of these boards, because it's quite hard to tell just by looking on the internet. Going to give you our thoughts and impressions of what they were like to use on flat water paddle ups and downwind conditions. Obviously going to give you pros and cons for each of these boards, and going to finish off with who we think each of these downwind boards will suit. So a quick recap on the Downwind board for last year. KT brought out the Dragonfly, a very different shape than any other board on the market. That board was really optimized for quick water flow, so paddling fast, getting up onto foil. It had a stepped bottom to help release the water. Worked great for obviously SUP downwinding and also a bit of winging as well. Now the DNA of that Dragonfly has continued on to the newer shapes and actually filtered down into some of the foil wing boards as well. All of these boards are finished in the same construction, full carbon board. KT are using their seamless foam technology, which is more precise than conventional CNC molding. These boards are incredibly light and very stiff, and they're finished off with two 13-inch US foil boxes. So now let's dive into the Downwind boards for 2024, the shapes and what we thought about them on the water. The first board to look at is the board that was out last year. This is the version 2. This is the Jinxu Dragonfly V2. They're aiming this board for downwind, light wind, winging. So they have slightly refined this board, but the basic characteristics are very much the same from the 2023 board. We've been using both the 2023 and the 2024, and they're very, very similar. Looking at the shape of the board, not the longest of boards in the range. You will see that when we start talking about the crossing and the surf, but really the magic is all to do with the bottom shape of this board. So pointy up at the nose, but under that nose it's a round displacement hull, and that round displacement hull carries on back all the way to the step in the board. The step in the board is designed to cut that water flow and get you to break yourself up onto the foil nice and quick and early. And the tail has got those sharp bevels all the way back to the tail. So for taking off, it releases the water, and for touching down, when you do touch down, it doesn't tend to stick. The downside of having a completely rounded bottom is it is more unstable. And you will notice on the boards in a minute, they have slightly changed the bottom shape. Now this is the big differences between these two other new boards. The stuff they have changed on this board for this year, they've given you a bit more space to run it with a Generation 2 foil drive system, which is great. A load of you are getting into the sport using foil drives. The tail shape's been tweaked a tiny bit so it has better water release as you go to pop up. But the board is pretty close to the previous V1 last year. And to be honest, that board was a really great board, so nothing massively needed to change. You will see, looking at the sizes of these boards are incredibly lightweight. An 88 litre at 6'6" long, all the way up to 135 litre at 8'4" long. So if we're driving on to Jinxu Crossing V1, so this is a brand new board for this year. So this board is a little bit longer overall and a little bit narrower overall compared to the original and V2 Dragonfly. You'll see their sizes are comparable. They've got an 88 litre, but that's 7'6" long, so way longer than the V2, and they've got 120 litre, but that's 8'4" long. This board is aiming towards really SUP downwinding. You could do a bit of light wind winging with this, but really it's SUP downwinding. Looking at the bottom shape and how the board has changed from the Dragonfly V2, the underneath of the board and the nose shape is about the same. Moving back, you start to get a slight flat section in front of the stepped bottom. Not a massive flat section, maybe it's only about 5 to 6 inches, but that flat section does make a difference to the stability of the board. It makes the board less rocky, a little bit more planted, obviously when you're off the foil. Moving back, you've still got the same stepped bottom, and the tail is very similar. It's got a slightly flatter section in the top of the tail there, but it's fairly close, and obviously it's still designed to do the same thing. Release the water quick and early, and obviously when you touch down, comes up nice and early, and when you're carving from rail to rail, those back edges don't catch, so they give you a lot of freedom of movement when you're on the foil. But the board being longer and thinner is going to allow you to travel faster and get up on foil earlier and get up on smaller foils earlier, which is a real telltale of where the board is going. I will dive into what these boards are like on the water in a minute, but just bear in mind we're talking about shapes and sizes at the moment. So another brand new board for 2024, a board I think a lot of you are going to get excited about, is the Jinxu Dragonfly Surf. Now this is a bit of a cross between the full Dragonfly and the Crossing. So you have a board that is not as long overall for the comparable volume as the Crossing. Sizes start at 95 litre, and that's 7'4" long, all the way up to 145 litre at 8'4" long, so a little bit bigger sizes in there. And this board is actually a little bit wider. You can really see that in the outline shape compared to the other boards. What they've also done underneath this board is increased the flat section in front of the stepped bottom. So the nose shape, still displacement, very similar. Yes, there's a bit more width up at the nose there, very similar to the other two. Then that bottom is a little bit flatter, a little bit bigger. You probably guessed it, it's going to give you a little bit more stability. Obviously the board's got extra width as well. So this board on paper is already showing it's going to be way more stable than the Crossing and the V2 Dragonfly. Still got the same stepped bottom, and the tail shape, it's got less of a flat section in towards that final V at the tail, but it's still gearing up to get you up on the foil early, and when you touch down to release and get back up on the foil again. But again, way more stable than the other two. So another thing that's worth saying about the two new boards, so the Crossing and the Surf, is the deck is slightly different compared to the Dragonfly V2. So the deck is a bit more concaved in these two boards, and you can notice that when you're up and foiling. It is a much more of a comfortable sort of stance it gives you having that concave deck. Unfortunately, the V2 still hasn't got that concave deck. Not a massive negative to it, but it's something to be aware of. So the two new boards have got concaved decks. The price points for all these boards, well, you are looking at a board that is at around £1,500 to £2,000 price point, up there at price point, but you do get a standout construction, very lightweight, stiff board, and for the designs, you're getting some of the best designs on the market, right up to date. So top end price point, but you do get a top end board as well. Now, with all that information, I haven't really jumped into what they're really like on the water, so I'm going to give you our thoughts of what they were like on the water. Now, I am going to be looking at flat water paddle ups and downwind sessions. The reason we do flat water paddle ups is because it gives us a really great datum idea of how these boards are going to perform. So how quickly do they release up onto foil? How nicely do they touch back down? What sort of pump technique do you need to get up onto foil in the first place? This stuff is golden stuff when you come to reviewing and testing a product, to give you a really flat level playing field of how they each feel. Obviously using them downwinding is the conditions they're designed for, but how big was it that day? Was a bump particularly bigger? Was the tide a bit stronger? Did it link up the swell a little bit more? Did you have a bit more of a gust? There's loads of variables that can come into play when it comes to testing them just in downwinding. So flat water first. Straight away, stability of each of these boards. The most stable board by far is the Surf. Bit wider, and it has that generally bigger flat section. The Crossing has got that flat section, not as big as in the Surf, and it's a little bit longer overall. That does actually help with the stability as well, but it's a little bit narrower compared to the other two boards. So it's still stable because it has that flat section, not as stable as the Surf. And the least stable board out of the three when you're off the foil is the Dragonfly V2. Constant round bottom, always wants a slight rock from side to side. definitely giving you the least stability. But it's still not super unstable because it has got a large flat stepped bottom that does give you that bit of stability back again. When it comes to initiating the paddle strokes and getting the speed on the board, the fastest board to paddle on flat water is the crossing, longer, thinner, good amount of glide speed to it. So you find that you can get up on foil or start to initiate that foil quicker on that board. Definitely second to that is the Dragonfly V2. Very quick board because it's fully rounded underneath the front of the board towards the stepped bottom. It does release that water quickly, so it's not far behind the crossing. And the surf is definitely the slowest to paddle up, but it still has a good length to it, a little bit longer overall than the Dragonfly V2, but it's a little bit wider than both those boards, so it's not as quick to paddle up. But the thing to think about when you're paddling up is the technique to get up on the foil is different for these three boards. The Dragonfly V2 is very easy and quite adaptable if you pump your foil to get up onto foil. So if you're used to pumping your foil, working your foil, you can actually initiate that foil quite early. The crossing is the opposite. It requires more board speed, and because it's longer, you can't initiate that pump as easily as you can do on the shorter boards. The surf is a bit of a compromise between the two. Doesn't go as fast as the crossing or the Dragonfly V2, but it does require a little bit more of a pump technique like you do with the Dragonfly V2. So keep a note how they feel on flat water. Now moving into downwinding conditions. Riding conditions, we had 20 to 25 knots across the bay. Downwind section, probably ranging swell sizes from knee, waist high, maybe to shoulder high at a push on some of those bigger peaks. The foil that was tested with these boards was an Armstrong APF 1675 and a 220 tail. So still quite a relatively big foil, more of a pump foil than actually a smaller downwind foil. But it did really work well with these boards, and at no point did we feel overfoiled. So jumping on the Dragonfly V2 straight away, it's a board we're very used to the feel of the board. It's definitely noticeable how this board, you are going to have to acquire better footwork because you have that completely rounded bottom if you're paddling out to your sort of downwind foil location. When you go to get on a wave, it picks up very, very easily, pops up onto the foil very, very easily. And when you're riding, it has a very nice feeling because it's a relatively compact board and you can throw the board around. Definitely if you come to touchdown, because of the fully rounded bottom underneath and the tail, the way that V set up at the tail, it does release and get back up onto foil very, very quickly. This is a board we're really comfortable with, and we've been using it a while, and it's been great to be using this and testing the other boards off of it because it gives us a really good feel of how they compare. So the big thing straight away as you jump on the crossing is it felt just generally longer. It's a longer board. It does paddle into those waves quicker and get you up on foil quicker, but it can have a limitation if you're catching or paddling in shorter, sharper, swelly chop conditions. So it liked the bigger wave. And also when you're up and riding, if you're riding again in shorter, sharper chop and you're lower on the foil, that nose does touch down a lot more compared to the Dragonfly V2. Stability, it is more stable. Straight away you notice that extra stability, even though it's a narrower base board compared to the Dragonfly V2. So jumping onto the surf, a very adaptable, easy board to use. Bit more width, bit more flat section underneath, not needing to worry about the flat water paddle up as much because you had the wind, you had the waves to help you, gets up on foil nice and easily. When you're riding it, you've got the more concave deck like you've got on the crossing as well, but it's a little bit shorter between the V2 and the crossing. So it allows you to ride in those bumpier conditions and not touch that nose down as much as it would do in the crossing. Will really like this board. He did find he had the best runs on this one, but he still preferred the overall balance performance of the Dragonfly V2. So that's an interesting one. Easier board to use, but maybe doesn't offer as much top end performance because when you're riding back and forth, you've got a bit more width there, which actually is going to affect you carving around on the board. To summarise the downwind boards with some pros, cons, and who should be buying these boards, Looking at Dragonfly V2, this is a really great all-round balanced wing downwind board. Being a little bit more compact, it does work well in all types of water conditions, from estuary choppy runs to open sea downwind runs. It's not too wide, it's about the right width. Really good in how this board's got more space to take the new generation of foil drives, and it's definitely very quick and slippy to come up onto foil because of that full rounded bottom. Cons or negatives? Well, this board is less stable than the other boards. Maybe it might require you to upsize. If you're looking at the 100 litre in the other one, you might need to go to the bigger board in this one just to give you a little bit more stability. Who will it best suit? Well, it's somebody who's already into downwind foiling or has been downwind foiling a few times. Because it's not the easiest board to learn on, you're gonna need to have a bit more experience behind you or just be quite good with your overall balance. As I said, you could use it in all types of downwinding conditions. That is where it has a massive bonus. Definitely you could be a light wind winger and getting onto this. You could even take this SUP surf foiling as well, but it's not so adaptable as the other boards. So really a person with a little bit more experience and a little bit better balance. Looking at the crossing, the extra length and the narrowness in its width gives you a really great fast board to paddle up onto foil. It's still relatively stable because it's got a small flat section there, more stable than the wider Dragonfly V2. The concave deck is comfortable when you're up and riding, and again, because it's not too wide, you can throw the board around a bit. The cons or observations, definitely this is going to be a bit more crucial about where you're going to be riding the board. It's just a downwind board, it's not so much of a wing crossover board because of its length. You need to be using it in those better swell conditions, so not really estuaries. Bay runs, yes, but better swell, a bit more swell, maybe a bit lighter wind, but a better swell, a bigger period. Definitely who's it going to be best suited for? You could come into it as a beginner paddler. It's probably not going to help you progress, but it's also not going to hinder your progression either. If you're going to be paddling obviously in open seas and swells more, you could jump onto this as a first time board. Really is probably somebody who's got a little bit more experience with downwind foiling, maybe similar to the person who's got the same amount of experience riding the Dragonfly V2, but they're going to be wanting to ride open seas more, maybe with smaller foils. So you get that overall speed up faster onto a smaller foil and you start riding. So a bit more of a truer open water downwind foil board. Looking at the surf, wow, it's a very user-friendly, fun and easy board to use. Good combination of width and length there. So the length in between the two other boards, width is a little bit wider, very, very stable, nice flat section underneath the board. So if you're a bit more unsure under your feet, they have that board and they have bigger sizes in that board as well. It still paddles up onto foil well. Maybe you need a little bit more timing, wind, chop because it hasn't got so much glide, but it's not far behind the other two boards. Negatives to that though, when you're up and riding, it's got a bit more width to it. So as you're throwing the board around, if you start to carve the board harder, you've got more width there you don't need when you're up on the foil. Who's it best suited? Well, this board is going to suit a lot of people. We'd have one of these each quite happily. You could do a lot of different disciplines with this. Real crossover board. So you could use this obviously for winging, downwind supping obviously, surf sup foiling on the waves, just paddling back out. That could work well. It's got enough width there to give you that stability when you're paddling around in choppy waters. And ability wise, you could get into the sport doing this, you could progress through the sport doing this. A lot of people are going to enjoy this board, and as I said, there's a lot of sizes in there as well. So it really is, it's a board that everybody can have this board. The other two are a little bit specialist. This is an all-round beauty. Okay, so that's the downwind boards. Now moving on to the wing boards. Now unfortunately we didn't get much time at all to ride these boards because we've had a bit of a drought when it comes to wind. So not as much changes in the prone and foil range, but there are some changes that definitely need highlighting, and there is a new board in there as well. So 3 boards in the range. They have updated the Drifter and the Jinxu, and they have a brand new board with the Super K. So the drifter board has a massive range of sizes in this board. So you could be using this board for prone surfing, sup surfing, winging, pretty much anything goes with this board. This board is a little bit longer and has a little bit more width compared to the volumes of the Jingsu. So a very stable board. The shape of this year, displacement nose underneath the board, moving into a double concave, running towards the back of the board. This is the 4th generation of this drifter, and they've definitely been tweaking and changing the design over years. It's very, very popular. A load of you are out foiling with this board, and I think having that massive range of sizes in there really is going to allow a board for pretty much every rider. Just like the Downwind boards, this board is also set up to take the foil assist, so you can get out there and power yourself onto some bumps, maybe get into a little bit of downwind foiling with this board as well. Definitely a board that a lot of wingers are going to have in their range. But if you're after a board to do a little bit more freestyle-y, spinny around stuff, you're going to be looking at the Jingsu. Less sizes in this board, so it's pushing a bit more towards more of just the winging focus or the sup foil focus. It has a stepped bottom, very much like the Dragonfly boards, the same sort of concept on that. Double concave comes towards that flat bottom, so you're still going to get a good amount of stability and a good amount of water flow coming down across the board. The Jingsu and the drifter do sit well alongside each other, and they do fit to very different purposes. Now, a board we did use, and believe it or not, we used on flat water paddle ups as well as downwind winging, is the Super K. It's a very exciting board because it's very different from the other 2 boards. It's like the designer has taken a Dragonfly and a Jingsu and come up with the Super K. So you have the characteristics of the downwind boards with the slightly round displacement nose into a flatter section before the stepped bottom, but the stepped bottom is still there, and the tail is slightly more pulled in compared to the other wing foil boards. Round rails similar to the downwind Dragonflies as well. A little bit longer, a little bit narrower. Not so many sizes in that board, 60 litres up to 104 litres. When we paddled this board up on flat water, it was noticeable how quick it actually came up onto foil if you had a good pump technique. And of course, when you're up on foil, if you are literally doing flat water pumping because you've got less swing weight, that board is easier to pump as well. You could transfer this board into downwind supping for sure. Maybe if you are paddling in really windy conditions, 25, 35, 40 knots, you could actually just use this as your downwind board. It would work better with bigger base foils to paddle up onto foil, but in windy conditions, this could still be very adaptable for you. And yes, you could use it for winging, you could definitely use it for sup surfing. It would be really great for catching a few waves there. Negatives to this board, well, it has got foot strap inserts, so if you're not going to be riding with foot straps, it does add a little bit more weight to it, but it's not very much. All the boards that come with foot strap inserts do come as standard with foot straps. This is a really great compact board that's going to open up a lot of things for different riders in different wind conditions and different water states. So the Super K is definitely a board that's very different compared to the other 2 wing prone foil boards, and it really does sit in between the full downwind range and this more wing-based range. A lot of you are going to be very interested in the Super K. If you can see one, demo one, a board I think you should be looking at for a bit more of a multi-sport foil-based board. So there we go, there's our overview of the KT range. We did look at more of the downwind-based boards, but we have touched into a few more of the wing-based boards as well. I hope you found this review interesting and informative, and it helps you understand if some of these boards are right for you. Without a doubt, if you are after quality, stiffness, lightweight, and very good design shapes, the KT range has all of that, and it's definitely a range you should be looking at. If you've used these boards, I'd love to hear your feedback. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. There's loads of videos like this that go out there weekly, and also remember, check out SUPboarder Pro, which is our subscription service, which is where we put extra bonus SUP and foil content on there as well. My name is Ruben from the SUPboarder team. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you on another SUPboarder video soon.